Good morning, it's mid-July and I think I'm going to do a walk around of kind of the northern section of my food forest. I use these videos mainly for me so I can remember what I planted, where I planted, and what that looked like along the way. So I can look back in a couple years at how I predicted things to grow and see how that worked out. But also I watch a ton of videos of people walking around their farms. And so I'm going to use these all winter long when it's snow and I can't get outside to enjoy my garden to appreciate what I'm building as well. I'm posting it in the hopes that someone else finds this interesting. If so, tag along. So this is the driveway facing from our house to the road. And along this section I call kind of my northern food forest. We have this windbreak of cedars that does an amazing job, but over time I've been slowly removing them from the ends and then planting other things in. The forest I'm building will create enough of a wind buffer just from the pure density, as well as some of the evergreens that I'm planting on the north side of this. And so over time I'm going to thin out these cedars, making sure that I'm replacing them with appropriate trees for the wildlife, and I maintain that windbreak and have that shade along the side of the house. So this is the north side. I actually took cedar trees out of this area just last year, so you can see a lot of that cedar shavings, whatever you want to call them, underneath there. And then I planted this spring a skeena cherry tree on semi-dwarf rootstock. Everything you're seeing right now was actually here, so they're really benefiting from that extra light from the cedar trees that I've removed. And then along this, and I really haven't kept up with it, there are some perennials that I've put in here, and then this year I kind of filled that in with annuals. A theme you're going to see on this walkabout is weeds, 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 weeds. So my cadence often is that early in the summer I'll be focused on planting and getting things established, and then as the summer goes on I have more time to deal with the weeds and rehabilitate my beds. So if weeds make you anxious, this is not the video for you, my friend. So what we're looking at actually in this entire section was farmland up until 3 years ago when we took over the place. And so you've seen the weeds come into that degraded land and really try to regenerate that soil, and I'm completely fine with that. I really can't maintain it all. As you'll see, I have some paths around that I can walk my dog on and access the plants, and I have a very clear vision for what I want this area to be in 10, 15, 20 years that I'll share with you as I walk along. So what you're looking at right now is a lilac tree that was there, and I don't think I knew what it was when I planted this Asian pear right beside it, but that's fine. They're gonna do quite well beside each other. I might have to do some careful pruning, but there's gonna be no harm with them having that close together, and they'll support each other. I see some suckers there, which I'm always excited for. So this is a sucker that's come off the root likely of that lilac, which means this fall I can transplant that out and have more lilacs around, which my wife absolutely loves lilacs, so I'm always trying to have more around here for that early spring bloom. Just in behind here, I've planted a couple Nanking cherry trees, or bushes, and so the idea is to have them thicken up through here. And you know, I know they're a little bit sour, but I'm sure they'll feed the birds, or we'll have some pies from that. Here's another Asian pear, and that's kind of the theme of this part of the orchard, was a lot of density in pears. I would say now I really focus on a lot more diversity. Initially I was really thinking of, I need to get them this close together so that I get good pollination, and that's probably a good strategy. But in most of the planting I do now, I do a lot fewer of one variety in a section, whereas in this area alone I think I have 5 different pear trees here. So this is the entrance coming off the side of our driveway to the lawn, and on the left hand side we have St. John's wort, which is going to be it's a native to this area, and there is medicinal value if I ever wanted to harvest it for that. And on this side, which some of the leaves are burning off but it's still okay, is witch hazel, which is also native to this area, and so it should do fine. So coming in, you'll see weeds, 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 which it's on my to-do list for this weekend to deal with those. And then an apple tree that's doing quite well, with a garlic that I have to remove the scape on just as part of that understory. I'm always really trying to think about how to build out these guilds. I really don't have enough materials and time, but I am working on building these out to support these trees properly. And And then along here you'll see amongst the weeds some annuals that I've stuck in, that some are doing well, some aren't. There's an elderberry that I planted, I had grown from cutting, and should fill in this space nicely. And I'm not sure what that was. I think that was an annual flower that I planted that isn't loving life right now. And then in here I've stuck a broccoli. Those were a currant that I grew, I think from cutting, or maybe it was given to me. And then we're into our pear trees. I believe this is a Bartlett and up there is a Bosc, but I'm not completely sure. I could have that backwards. I would have to check the tags. Why don't I do that now? It says Bartlett. Okay, so that's Bartlett, that's Bosc. So if I look back on this future me, that's what I planted here, and I won't forget that. On this side, I have this apricot tree, again with some garlic as an understory, and currants. Currants are pretty common along here because they're so easy for me to propagate that I basically put them everywhere while I continue to grow some other propagation materials. And here you'll see amongst the weeds some onions. So I planted onions there a couple years ago and I've never harvested them, and so they're going to seed. And I just like the fact that they're kind of going wild. I don't know if I'll ever harvest them or just kind of leave them, but I like that they're just doing their thing. In this is some very prolific Jerusalem artichoke. Last year was its first year in the ground. I harvested a lot of it, and now it's just really coming back. So along here, what I try to do is make sure that it stays inside its bed, because it's known for being very aggressive, a little bit invasive, and I'm gonna make sure I keep it in there. Jerusalem artichoke is a great food for the late fall, early spring, when the ground is thawed, but it's still very cold. You can dig that up from the ground where it stays quite nice, and then you can have this amazing tuber that's quite different from a lot of the other foods that we eat, and cooks up nicely with some amazing fiber. Through here, I'll just finish out this side. Behind the Jerusalem artichoke, I've put a peach tree, and I'll get back to that other Asian pear in a second. The keystone here is a Rainier cherry tree. My wife absolutely loves the type of cherry, and so this has been a big focus of making this tree happy, and it is right now. You can see from the growth. And because that's on mazzard rootstock, it means it's going to become a really large tree, 20-25 feet, and spread a lot. So I'm careful about what I plant around because there's going to be a lot of shade here, but I'm trying to use some of that space for annuals. I think this is maybe a zucchini, not completely sure, and then some flowers that I've stuck in, and I'll get rid of some of these weeds today. Here, I believe this is my Saskatoon berry, and over here on the other side of the path is my shrub cherry. I planted them around the same time, and I believe that's the difference, but we'll see as they grow up. I did a video not too long ago about planting potatoes and weeds, and you'll see that they're coming up quite nicely. That approach of literally just sticking on the ground with weeds is working. I have a lot of weeds coming through, but definitely not as many weeds here as what was here before. And so as those grow and I hill them, I should completely wipe out the weeds, and I'll actually pull some of them as well. Another plant you'll see almost everywhere is comfrey. So I've started with one comfrey plant, and I probably have 50, and I keep propagating. Just love that as a green mulch, as well as those flowers to support the bees, that shade for the ground. It's a really, really useful plant and really easy to propagate. There's my other pear tree with a garlic growing in it and surrounded by clover and some other weeds. Obviously good for it, so I'll just leave a lot of that alone. Some annual flowers I planted in front. And then back here, so early in the spring, I planted out this elderberry that I grew from cutting, and then over here, a mulberry, a dwarf mulberry that I grew from cutting. And both of them died because I planted them too early in May and the frost got them. And then I left them alone, and it was almost the late June before I started to see them poke back up, but they came back up, and they should do fine now that they're reestablished. I will cut down some of those thistles. Generally, if it's a prickly weed, I try to take it out because I don't love them, and the rest of them I just ignore and leave them alone. So coming back here, here's a cider apple tree. Actually, sorry, that's a Gelander apple tree that I got. Just planted this year, and it's doing quite well. And back here, through the weeds, is a pine tree that is going to deliver pine nuts. So this one is specifically bred to have bigger pine cones, bigger pine seeds, and so that'll be fantastic for collecting those in about 10 years from now. All right, so coming back out, back towards my rainier here, and you'll see I've worked a little bit on the understory. I have some currants and a lot of weeds that I need to clear out. And then just along the side, this hazel is going to be a fixture here, but then this is just space I'm using right now essentially as a tree nursery. So I have some Asian pears, those, and there's a rainier that I grew from seed. So some plants that I grew from seed that needed a home for this season. I planted there temporarily because, again, I'm reserving this space for when that rainier cherry tree gets bigger. But for now, I really don't have a use for this space, and I might as well fill that in. So I'll just finish this block. On the periphery of this, again, I have more potatoes that are starting to come up. I have an apple tree that I've planted here, and there's my other Asian pear. Back in there, there's a bunch of raspberries that are starting to take over, and some staghorn sumac that volunteered here and is growing, and I'll just leave that until it becomes a problem. Eventually that will be a good chop and drop to feed that soil. So over here, again, another apple tree on semi-dwarf rootstock. That one I got this year, I believe, is an ambrosia. So that's a pretty popular apple tree now, and I'm excited to taste that in a couple years. And then here is a plum / cherry cross that I got not too long ago. It is Northern Sunset. So yeah, so I'm excited to try that again in a couple years, and it's doing okay with some currants, a wild rose, and then I think that's a cantaloupe actually that's not doing well as a part of that understory. So coming back out in here, there's another hazel tree, hazel shrub, and so we'll let those grow up. And you'll see those hazels are dotted along here, so I'm excited for those seedlings to grow up. This is pure weeds, except I mow it to create access, as well as walk my dog through here once a day. You can see how degraded that soil is compared to where I'm rehabilitating and what the weeds are doing for me. I do try to get clover established along these pathways, and I have more work to do there. More hazels that I grew from seedlings, beside a native mulberry that I grew from a seedling here. So that one was always intended as kind of feed the birds, keep the birds away from my cherry trees and make them happy. I've heard that that works. I don't know if that'll be successful, but I'm going to leave that there as kind of a treat for the birds. And I really do like to intermix native plants with my food forest, as you'll see as I go along. So again, you're going to see a lot of weeds, some volunteer staghorn sumacs, and lots of other stuff going along. And even along the path, I've started to establish these oak trees. I love oak trees, I love maple trees, so longer term, these are gonna start to become a dominant canopy through here. They shouldn't hurt my food forest too much, but this will just be a gorgeous section to walk and hang out as these trees mature. Behind the weeds, towards the neighbor, again, this is the north side, I've planted, that you can't see, a bunch of evergreen trees. So eventually this will be a nice wind, visual, noise barrier from that road that you keep hearing. You can't see those now, but they're coming along. I planted them, they were only about 12 inches, and they're just getting established. So walking along this little path, we get in, again, more native trees that I've planted along the way, and back in little pockets like these. And then intermixed with that is what's going to be the future of my food forest. So this is a pecan tree that's doing quite well. And then on the other side, because it'll handle a bit of the shade, is a pawpaw that I grew from seed and just planted in the ground about a week ago. So I've been watching that carefully. I really tried this strategy because I've had pawpaws die of too much sun. This time of year we get a lot of sun, a lot of heat, and it can be too much for pawpaws. So I've started to plant them right in the weeds like this and use the weeds as a bit of a shade barrier. And then for double measure, I use these tomato cages and I put some weeds over top of them just to provide shade. And this one looks really, really happy. I don't see any yellowing or problems in the leaves. I'll continue to water and monitor it. Pawpaws are kind of a nuisance to get started. They really do need that shade in my experience for the first couple of years. And then they want sun. So I'm hoping that this weed embedded method works for them to get them through those early years, and then they can become above the weeds and get the sun that they need. On this side, I think that was a pear tree I planted, but I'm not completely sure. I grew a bunch from seed and I stuck them through this area. I believe that that was one as well. So as we keep walking down this path, on this side is the other pecan tree. It wasn't doing quite as well. You can see at the bottom here, it died back at least one winter, and then there's a lot of new growth this year, that green, and it's doing okay. I'm really hoping it makes it through this winter without a lot of dieback, because this is its third year and it's really been struggling. Over here is another weed supported pawpaw, so let's take a look. Way under there, ooh, I gotta move some of that mulch because it's sitting on top there. But the leaves are still pretty happy, and it's getting enough light but not too much, and I think that's gonna work out for it. So as you can see, when I first started here, I listened to this idea that I have to plant all my trees 30 feet, 40 feet apart to prepare for that final spacing. And now I've realized that that's no fun because that takes forever, and I'm starting to support and plant a lot of trees in between. Unfortunately, because of that silver maple tree way over there, I get a lot of volunteers. And so this one I didn't plant, it just grew here, which I believe is a silver maple. And basically I just cut the weeds around it and let it grow. If it wants to live there, that'll be a great spot for it until it gets to be a problem for this chestnut tree, and then I can always hack it down at that point. But between now and then, it'll do a lot of good and help fill out this space. This is a Chinese American Chestnut Hybrid, which is really common because it's more blight resistant. But this one, I think it's really struggling with my soil. Chestnuts like a little bit more of an acidic soil, and I don't have that. I've tried a little elemental sulfur not too long ago to see if that will help this, but I'm still not sure whether chestnuts are a good fit for my property, my growing, or maybe this type of chestnut. Continuing along my path, we'll see more volunteers, and we'll see a chestnut tree, the same type, that's maybe doing a little bit better, and more weeds. So this path gets, we walk down it every day with the dog and check all this stuff out to see all the stuff that we're planting, growing, and see how it's doing. You see back here, we're starting to get into some of the first hazelnuts that I've planted. So no hazels this year, but hopefully next year. These border this field that we rent out where there's soy planted. So I always liked the hazels, a bit of a spray buffer, a bit of a wind buffer. So I'm really trying to build them up along this border. And then on this side, no luck so far, but there should be some seed hazels that are coming up through there at some point. More hazels, and eventually I want to be able to walk down this path surrounded by hazels on both sides. And I have some seedlings on the go to help support that, like this little one that's not doing great but will survive. Some of the other earlier plants I planted here was this Saskatoon berry, and there's more along the way. Here you can see I'm stool layering that up, so you can see the dirt and wood chips kind of up along it, and you can also see a runner there. So the intent actually is to use this to propagate a whole bunch next year, because I actually want a whole bunch of these for those early berries and those beautiful trees. And so I'm going to use this one to get more. There's another one down there. And then through here, you can see we're bordering our backyard and our trampoline. I have an apple tree there. You probably can't see it over there, but I have an elderberry. I have thornless honey locust that's planted there. Peach, and you can't see them, but a bunch of potatoes growing in the weeds over there. And then native plants along the way, like red buds over on this side that a friend gave me, down in there, which I have to clear the weeds out. And then coming up through here is, a tree I planted early, an Illinois ever-bearing mulberry. Again, mainly because I thought it would be neat, but I'm really excited for those berries. They taste really, really good. It's amazing how they hide them from the birds back in there to try and keep them from finding them. But this tree's growing quite well, and I'm excited because I actually really like the food, and once it gets bigger, it should produce a lot. Again, more of those volunteers along the way, through here. as well as some of these natives, which I think is a 9-bark, but I'm not sure, that I planted not too long ago. So we keep going along behind the cedars now, and we have this maple tree that I planted that I'm really excited. Again, I love the native trees, and I think they do a good job of complementing the food forest, bringing in that diversity, and hopefully helping keeping the pest problems down in my food forest to really support this as a proper ecosystem. I think that's an amber maple that I bought, and I know that that's not native. It was before I really knew anything, but I'm not going to take it out. And then more natives along back through here. Again, eventually I'm going to take all these cedars down to open this up a little bit. So I started by planting trees along the side that once they grow and I take those cedars down, I won't leave a huge gap. This is a Turkish hazelnut tree that I just planted this year that's growing quite well. Again, just to add some diversity and different genetics, because I am planting a lot of hazelnuts from seeds and I want different genetics here so I can grow my own seeds and see how that works. What you can't easily see, oh, there's more native trees, is up here. I love all the wildflowers along the way. We have a pawpaw that I planted last year, and there's another one over there that's going to help provide pollination. And then some of these mushroom beds that I've nestled back underneath the cedars for shade. I started with a bunch of hardwood. I've layered on a bunch of hardwood wood chips, and I threw more hardwood on top, that birch. And so I have different pods of this along the way with different mushroom strains that I bought to see how that's going to work out. You know, some of them are very medicinal. I hope they come through, because with the type of farming that I do, there's a lot of wood chips, a lot of wood debris, and so being good at cultivating mushrooms will only increase what I can get out of this farm from what would normally be a waste product. So we're making our way back to where we started. Again, more native trees and mulberries. And then here where I tried to plant, oh, there it is, my thornless honey locust. Nope, that's not it. There was a rainier tree back there. That vetch was sometimes catches my eye and looks like a honey locust, and it's totally not. More mushrooms. Here's a persimmon that I grew from seed. Thanks to Incredible Seeds, I got that from them, and then I grew this, and it's coming along nicely. It's only its second year. More maple trees. There's my thornless honey locust. So hopefully you can see I was confused initially by that versus the vetch, but that's going to grow up, provide a lot of food. It's a nitrogen fixing plant, but it won't block a lot of the light for the stuff that's in behind it, so it should fit nicely in here. Coming along, nice beautiful stuff along the way. Another elderberry that I grew from cutting. And then now we're kind of in behind where we started, and you can see those Asian pears. Back to the Nanking cherries. Again, more comfrey, more native plants, more currants. They're small, but they're amazing, those white currants. And really just a bunch of different plants. Hopefully a really productive food forest in the future. And I can't wait to reshoot this video in about 5 years to see all of these trees, all of these plants producing. I hope you enjoyed this walk with me. Thank you.